The tax planning team that helps business owners earn more and keep more.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, good morning. Welcome in. Out of Bounds, ESPN 105.9 The Zone. We welcome in special guest, Jeff Duncan, longtime New Orleans, Louisiana columnist with the Times-Picayune, covering the Saints, among other things, in New Orleans and Louisiana. And now with theathletic.com, great website that we reference all the time. And Jeff just wrote a book, Payton and Brees, the men who built the greatest offense in NFL history. And he's going to be kind enough to hang out with us at lunch today. We've invited some friends and people up and signed some books for us. Great looking book. And I can't wait to dive into it. Jeff Duncan joins us on the Modelo guest line. You can watch the show right now. Go to YouTube, search Out of Bounds Sports. Jeff Duncan, good morning, man. How are you?
Good morning, Bo. It's great to be back in Jackson. It's been a while.
Yeah.
You know, the city's growing incredibly.
Yes.
Last time I was here, it was probably a few years after the Saints had training camp here. I came up for a story assignment, met former colleague Rusty Hampton out from the Clarion Ledger, and then had steak dinner at Char. I don't know.
Yeah.
I can say that on the air.
No, you can.
Okay.
Yeah.
We had a great night, and it's good to be back in the city.
And you and Rusty have kind of a Louisville, Kentucky connection.
Correct.
Because you're from there, and then Rusty was up there at one point, either in Louisville or Lexington, running the newspaper, sports editor at some point, I think, right?
Yes, he was I started out covering Kentucky, I think, for the Courier-Journal.
Okay.
Which was my hometown newspaper. I worked there through college. Grew up reading great writers like Dave Kindred and Billy Reed.
Yeah.
Rick Bozich is still up in the area. Pat Forty came through the Courier-Journal. So it had a great tradition and history, and Rusty was a part of that.
And you went to University of Louisville.
Yes, and house divided. I was talking to Kendall coming over to the studio this morning about his house divided with Ole Miss and Mississippi State. I was Louisville, Kentucky. My father was a diehard Adolph Rupp.
Oh, yeah.
Kentucky basketball. I went to the University of Louisville. My mother worked at the med school there. So we were diehard Louisville Cardinal fans. And that was in the period of time when Louisville was getting to be kind of a national program under Denny Crum in basketball, winning national titles. So they were elbowing their way up and gaining status alongside Kentucky. And Kentucky fans did not like that, old school Kentucky fans.
No, because Kentucky dipped during that time.
Yes.
Joby Hall was good, but not – it's tough to follow Legend 1-2. He just wasn't special. And then they got in trouble with Eddie Sutton, and Pitino comes in. But you kind of called it at a time when Crum was running the show, so to speak, at that time.
Very much so. To this day, the biggest sporting event in my lifetime that just as a fan was what they called the Dream Game in 1983 when Louisville and Kentucky met in the regional final in Knoxville and played for the right to get to the Final Four, and they had not played in, I think, 20 or 30 years.
Really?
Kentucky would not play any other state schools, which was another reason why I did not like Kentucky. They would never play anybody in the state in any athletic competition. And this was kind of they kind of were forced to play by the NCAA tournament. And Louisville won that game. And, of course, the next year, then Kentucky started playing them every year so they could try and get revenge. But that was huge.
A couple years later, Never Nervous Purvis beats Duke.
Correct.
And that was Mike Krzyzewski's first championship game.
Yes, and that was kind of an upset. Kind of an upset. Louisville was, I think, an underdog in that game. And then their programs have all taken off since then.
Yeah.
Their football program got very competitive. Baseball, of course, under Dan McDonald's a national power.
Former Ole Miss assistant.
Very much has changed the entire profile of that program. And when I go back to visit Louisville, their campus now looks completely different. The athletic facilities are tremendous. It's not like the school when I went to school there. It was very much a commuter school. It is now very much a destination university. It wasn't that way before this kind of renaissance on campus.
Yeah, I was on the campus about a year and a half ago. Really cool what's happened in downtown Louisville. Culinary boom, like you said, U of L, great place. And we hit some of the bourbon distilleries which that's blown up. Jeff Duncan on the Modelo guest line. He's live in the Bank Plus studio. You're listening to the Out of Bounds show on ESPN 105.9 The Zone. I'm still somewhat mad at Denny Crum for stealing Kenny Payne from Bob Boyd
Laurel,
in
Mississippi,
1980.
right? No, Scuba.
Laurel, around Laurel, right?
Okay.
I think.
No, you're right. It's Laurel, and Charles Jones was Scuba, Mississippi.
Yes.
And Lancaster Gordon was a great player. All from Mississippi.
I remember Kenny Payne walking through the crowd of a Dudy Noble Field baseball game with Bob Boyd, and then he ends up going to Louisville. But anyway, so that's my big. Who Payne has now been an assistant with Calipari for like, I think 12, 13, 14
Not
years.
now. He's with the
is he
New
not?
York Knicks.
He's in the NBA.
Just went to the Knicks, I think, this past year.
Steve Nash? No, he took the Brooklyn job. Okay, so the Knicks or somebody else. I don't.
Yeah, I'm not sure who's, but that was a big surprise for him to leave for the NBA. And I remember well, I mean, Denny Crum built that program on Southern basketball talent.
Yeah.
Because in the South, football dominated, and they were able to go down and get players like Purvis Ellison, Lancaster Gordon, all these great players from the South to come up and play in Louisville where basketball was king.
Sure.
So, and it wasn't too far away. It was
Right.
closer than the Northeast, and that's really how you built the program.
Let's switch gears here. Talk about the book, Payton and Brees, the men who built the greatest offense in NFL history. So, can you tell me about when Sean Payton was driving Drew Brees around on kind of the recruiting trip?
Mm-hmm.
Didn't they get lost?
Yes, Sean was fairly new to the city as well, and he was coming back across the twin spans, the causeway goes across Lake Pontchartrain. I know exactly what he did. He was trying to get on I-10 and ended up on a service road and ended up back in the Lakeview neighborhood, which was devastated after Katrina. He just got lost and was getting nervous because he was trying to show them, of course, the best parts of New Orleans and the New Orleans area.
Sure.
It's a recruiting trip, free agency. Brittany was in the car, his wife in
And
the back.
at this time, how old are they roughly?
Oh, my
I
gosh.
mean, they're a young couple, 26?
Mid-20s, yes.
Okay.
And you have to remember also, Bo, they were basically in a recruiting battle against Nick Saban and the Miami Dolphins. Think about it at the time. South Beach, Nick Saban is a huge name in coaching. Miami has a great tradition, and Drew is coming from San Diego, so he's used to the beach lifestyle. They have a house in Del Mar. So to be able to sell against Miami, you really have to try, and this is post-Katrina New Orleans, devastation everywhere. And to me, it really was an early sign. We didn't know it at the time, but an early sign at the brilliance of Sean Payton that he would go head-to-head with really nothing in his war chest to compete against Nick Saban and win that battle, win that recruiting pitch simply by persuading Drew Brees that it would be the best fit for him. And look, they pushed their chips in on the contract. They outbid him. But
I didn't realize that.
yeah, but they had a larger contract on the table.
Okay.
But that said, they had to roll the dice to get him to come there because no one had ever recovered from that shoulder injury on your throwing shoulder in the history of the NFL. This was really a gamble for the Saints to go for it, but they really had nothing to lose.
Right. You're the Saints.
Coming off a 3-13 season after Katrina, first-year head coach is going to have a honeymoon period. He's going to have a longer leash. They could afford to do it. If you remember, Saban was coming off an 8-8 year in Miami. They felt like they were one player away. Not sure they wanted to take a chance on a guy with a bum shoulder who their medical staff had red flagged. The Saints medical staff had also red flagged it, but they were willing to take a chance on a guy with that work ethic and that drive and that commitment, and it paid off. It's the greatest free agency signing in NFL history.
Yeah, because I think we were discussing this last night, and Jeff Duncan joining us on the Out of Bounds show. We were talking about this last night. As great a coach as Nick Saban is, I don't think Drew Brees has even close to the career if he does go to Miami, Jeff, because they don't run that kind of wide open offense that Sean, as you said, kind of built himself from some other stops in New Orleans. Do you
I agree 100%. I mean, I think Drew would tell you that as well. As much respect as he has for Nick Saban, he knows that he went to the right place for him. I mean, Sean Payton was a quarterback himself. We've never seen a pairing like Sean Payton and Drew Brees in the history of the NFL. All the great elite quarterbacks never were paired with another offensive mind that also played the position. Joe Montana played with Bill Walsh. Bill Walsh didn't play quarterback. Okay. We could just go down the list. It's never happened. So that unique partnership, the fact that Luke McCown told me this for the book. He said, I've never played with a player that saw the game like a coach the way Drew Brees does, and I've never played for a coach that saw the game as a quarterback the way Sean Payton does. And I think that is unique.
So where was Drew in his rehab? I can't remember at that point. You're covering the team on a daily basis. Was he like well into it and they felt pretty good? You said both franchises flagged him to a certain extent.
Right.
Where was he? Could he have jumped out of the car that day during the recruiting trip and still thrown some balls?
No.
Or was he in the process of getting that thing where he wanted it?
No, he was. This is how bad it was at the time, Bo. When he signed with the Saints and came for the big introductory press conference and the photo op with Sean Payton and Tom Benson and Mickey Loomis, and they hold the jersey up for the photo, the number 9 jersey, he said he could barely hold it up for the photo. Like his arm was getting shaky holding it up for all the different photos that were being taken. That's how weak it was at the time. So it was a few weeks removed. He was in the middle of probably physical therapy, not even doing really rehab at that time.
Do you remember what month this was?
February, yes.
February. So, but he was ready by Labor Day that next year.
Yes,
right?
But there was even a period, Sean Payton tells the story, where they played had a practice, like inter-squad scrimmage at practice, and his arm was still not where it needed to be. And he went into a private meeting with his coaching staff and said, this is what we've got. This is it. We're in trouble. This is it. And it finally came around. It came around in preseason games. They played a preseason game here in Jackson.
That's right. Okay, I remember that.
Yeah, I think it was the Colts up here.
Because they did the camp here.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they couldn't play in the Superdome because it was being renovated, and they needed more time. And that's why they started the regular season in 2006. First two games were on the road to give them more time to finish the renovation project.
So through August of Brees' first year, from rehab and lifting weights and PT and all that, he eventually gets pretty darn healthy, 90+%, midway, late August, somewhere in there, Jeff?
Yeah, he said that there was a pass that he made in one of the preseason games, and he went over to Sean on the sidelines and said, that was it. It felt like what it used to feel like. I made that pass. There was no pain. And that was the kind of light bulb moment that he was back.
When did you realize, we're visiting with Jeff Duncan, longtime New Orleans columnist, Times-Picayune, now with theathletic.com. He's got a new book out, Payton and Brees, The Men Who Built the Greatest Offense in NFL History. At what point did you realize there's magic here?
Well, that's a hard question to answer. Like, I certainly thought that first season was magical. They were not expected to do anything. And that first night in the Dome when Steve Gleason blocked the punt was incredible. Incredible moment, emotional moment. I'll never forget that night. And it was bigger than football that night. It was a global stage on Monday Night Football. But there was a couple of years after that where things weren't really going that well. I think they went 7-9 and then 8-8. But late in the 2008 season, if you go back and look, that's when that offense started to take off. They finally started figuring everything out. They had brought in Jeremy Shockey and drafted Robert Meacham and had Devery Henderson, and Colston was starting to emerge, and Lance Moore came on board. Suddenly they started getting all these weapons with Reggie Bush, Pierre Thomas, and it started to take off, and they started really dominating offensively. I mean, those numbers were off the charts. People forget he being Drew Brees, almost broke Dan Marino's record for passing that season. He came just a few yards short.
08?
Yes. And so then they fixed the defense that next offseason. They bring in Greg Williams to coordinate the defense. They draft Malcolm Jenkins. They go get Jabari Greer in free agency. They fixed the defense. They got Darren Sharper, who was an all-pro player. And all of a sudden, that 2009, no one expected that. I remember distinctly talking to Peter King in his predictions, and he picked them to have a losing record. He picked them like 24th or 5th in the league out of 32 teams. And I said, Peter, you're underselling this team. They can be really good. That offense was dominant.
Right.
And they won their first 13 games that year. They were one of 7 teams in NFL history to go 13-0 out of the gate.
13-0 out of the gate. What'd they finish?
13-3.
They lost their last 3 games, and then they go on and win the Super Bowl.
Correct. And the last one, they didn't.
I'd forgotten about that. Did y'all remember that? I didn't remember.
And the amazing thing was there was another. The Indianapolis Colts and Peyton Manning also. They started 14-0. They actually went 1 game longer. And the Minnesota Vikings with Brett Favre, I think they might have been 13-0. They were 12-1. They were somewhere around there. My memory's a little off, but you had 3 teams that were just incredible that year. And you could make the argument that Minnesota outplayed the Saints in that NFC Championship game. I mean, they should have won that game. I talk to Saints players to this day that say that's the most talented team they've ever played. Brett Favre, Adrian Peterson. I mean, they were loaded, and they made 5 turnovers in that NFC Championship game and still almost won.
Yes.
Went to overtime.
Had every opportunity. Jeff Duncan on the Out of Bounds Show. In your book, Chapter 4, The Parcells Effect, can you kind of, lay it out to our listeners? People are going to buy this book. But Sean Payton's tie to Bill Parcells has been talked about from the jump. What is that chapter about? Or give us a cool tidbit or story within that chapter.
Well, Bill Parcells is the greatest influence on Sean Payton. Sean Payton was hired to work on his offensive staff sight unseen. He'd never worked with Bill Parcells. He just had a good reputation. Bill Parcells hired him on the tarmac at the New Jersey airport without ever having coached with him at all, just on a recommendation from Ernie Accorsi. Hires him, and immediately Sean took to the mentorship and the leadership and the overall scope of being a head coach, not just on the field, but running an organization, which is what Bill Parcells taught him. Sean often says that he got a master's degree in coaching from Bill Parcells. I mean, he learned how to be a coach. It goes beyond just personnel and X's and O's. Mm-hmm. It was more about philosophy. There's 10 commandments. I think it's 11 commandments that Parcells has on quarterback play and what you look for in a quarterback in the NFL. It's in the book, actually. It's the beginning of one of those chapters. And if you go and look at those 11 commandments, don't be a clown. You're like a CEO of a team. You have to carry yourself. You can still have fun, but you can't be a clown. Arm strength isn't that important. Being a field general is what's important. All these kind of maxims that Sean adhered to and applied when he looked for a quarterback and found it in Drew Brees. So really everything that Sean Payton does is just a byproduct of what he learned from Bill Parcells. I mean, in his office, on the wall is all these Bill Parcells sayings, also photos of him and Bill Parcells together. He still talks to him weekly, still takes recommendations on personnel. They're very, very close, and I think Bill Parcells is very fond of Sean Payton. Of all the great coaches that have come up,
sure,
you think about it. Bill Belichick's from that tree. Nick Saban's from that tree, and it's one of the great strengths that Sean Payton has is not just his X's and O's acumen, but his ability to see the bigger picture of understanding the personnel department's needs, the business operations side of things. He's got a very wide lens on how to run a football program.
And when he was hired, he was not a coordinator. He was the QB coach, right, at Dallas?
Correct. He did have play calling responsibilities in Dallas. Yes, he did. But he had them taken away, if you remember, in New York.
From Fossil?
Yes.
Okay.
And that was a low moment in Sean Payton's career. He thought he would maybe never recover from that. And fortunately, he gets kind of saved by Bill Parcells, and they take off, and he was offered the Oakland Raiders head coaching job by Al Davis and almost took it the year before he came to New Orleans. And Bill Parcells and Jerry Jones advised him to not take it. Their advice was it wasn't the right fit at the right time. He came back for another year and ends up getting interviews with the Green Bay Packers and the New Orleans Saints, and turned out to be the best thing he ever did.
Do you think Jerry has regretted Jerry Jones never having the opportunity to either poach or or hire Sean Payton back?
Oh, I'm sure he does. I mean, they're still very close. When you go to the NFL Combine, they hang out together. Jerry Jones, and they have dinner. They go back and forth. They really like each other personality-wise. But I'm not sure Sean Payton would be the same coach for the Dallas Cowboys that he is in New Orleans. I mean, he kind of has free reign there. Mickey Loomis, you and I talked about this last night. Mickey Loomis is a very underrated general manager in force. His personality fits like a glove with Sean Payton, who's much more outgoing, much more high profile, and
sucks a lot of oxygen out of the room.
Yes, big ego, but in a good way. In a good way, like the way a head coach has to be. Of that. And Mickey is able to step back and defer, and that does not happen for most NFL general managers at that level. And it's just a yin-yang thing. He's not afraid to call out Sean Payton and let him know who's the boss, but he lets him be the face of the franchise along with the quarterback.
Mickey doesn't care at all
about that.
About being the face.
At all. And he learned that from Dave McCormick, who was the general manager of the Seattle Seahawks when Mickey started out in the business, and that was his philosophy, and that's what he's always adhered to. The quarterback and the head coach are the face of the franchise.
I did not realize that. Mickey Loomis and he was a holdover as far as he could have easily not been in that position, Jeff.
Right. Randy Mueller brought him in.
Yes.
Randy Mueller was the general manager and brought in Mickey to be basically the cap guy, the business guy, the numbers guy. That was his background. And this is another sign of how good I believe Mickey Loomis is. A few years back, they overhauled the scouting department. They were not getting results in their drafts, their personnel departments, and they brought in Jeff Ireland, who is another Bill Parcells guy. And Sean Payton recommended him, and Jeff Ireland is another guy. He doesn't have a big ego, but he's been a general manager in the league. And Mickey was fine with it. A lot of general managers would be intimidated by that, having another guy in the building. Instead, he realized this is a guy that has a background that I don't have on football scouting side, personnel, and that three-headed monster now with those three men as the brain trust, I think, is the reason this resurgence in the organization.
Jeff Ireland, is he still there, or did he get another job?
Yes.
Okay.
Just ran the draft.
All right. Just ran the draft. Out of bounds, 105.9 The Zone, ESPN. Jeff Duncan, longtime columnist, Times-Picayune. How long were you with the Times-Picayune?
Started in 99.
Okay. So about 20 years.
Yeah, 2 decades is what I like to say. And they're just now accepting me as maybe a New Orleanian down there.
And now with theathletic.com, his new book that we'll continue to discuss in hour number 3, Payton and Brees, the men who built the greatest offense in NFL history. The show is brought to you by Farm Bureau Insurance. Bundle your auto and home and save with your local Farm Bureau insurance agent in any of the 82 counties in the state of Mississippi. You can also hit favorites.com. Get a quote in 4 minutes or less. The show is also presented by Eye Care Professionals and Dr. Kirk Jeffries and his team. 2 locations on Lakeland Drive, Jackson and their new location, Belmead and Flowood. Dr. Kirk Jeffries and Eye Care Professionals. More with Jeff Duncan on the way.